Why overthinking isn't the problem you think it is. You've probably said it to yourself before. I overthink everything. You say it like a diagnosis, like a flaw, like something broken inside you. Maybe other people have said it too. You think too much. You're too in your head. You just need to relax. So you start believing that your mind is the problem, that if you could just quiet it, slow it down, simplify it, you would finally feel normal. But what if overthinking isn't the enemy? What if it's misunderstood? Because here's the truth. You don't just think. You examine, you analyze, you anticipate. You replay conversations not because you're weak, but because you care how they landed. You hesitate before decisions not because you're incapable, but because you see consequences others ignore. Your mind doesn't skim the surface. It goes deeper. And depth can feel heavy in a world that rewards speed. You live in a culture that praises quick answers, instant reactions, confident certainty. But your mind doesn't operate like that. It explores layers. It questions assumptions. It searches for meaning. And when that depth has no outlet, it starts to loop. The problem isn't that you think too much. The problem might be that you've been taught to treat your depth like a defect. So, before we try to fix your overthinking, maybe we need to understand it. Let's be honest. Overthinking doesn't feel like a gift. It feels exhausting. Your mind doesn't just process one thought. It branches into 10. One decision turns into 5 possible outcomes. One text message turns into multiple interpretations. One small mistake becomes a replay loop at night. And when the room goes quiet, your thoughts get louder. You lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying what you said, what you should have said, what you shouldn't have said. It feels like your brain refuses to switch off. So of course you label it as the problem, because it's tiring. It drains your energy. It makes simple choices feel complicated. It can even make you doubt yourself. But here's something subtle. Overthinking isn't random chaos. It follows patterns. You overthink things that matter to you. You overthink situations where you fear consequences. You overthink moments where identity feels at stake. You don't spiral about everything. You spiral about what feels meaningful. And that distinction matters, because a careless mind doesn't overthink. An indifferent person doesn't replay conversations. A shallow perspective doesn't examine layers. Your mind is active because it cares. The problem isn't that you think deeply. The problem is when depth turns into self-attack, when analysis turns into self-doubt, when reflection turns into rumination. There's a thin line between wisdom and looping. And most of the time, you're not stuck on the thinking side. You're stuck on the judging yourself for thinking side. That's where the real weight begins. There's something important we rarely say about overthinking. It's not just a habit. It's a coping strategy. Somewhere along the way, your mind learned that thinking ahead meant safety. If you anticipate every outcome, you won't be blindsided. If you replay every conversation, you won't embarrass yourself again. If you analyze every decision, you won't make the wrong move. Overthinking isn't random. It's protective. It developed for a reason. Maybe you grew up in an environment where mistakes were magnified. Maybe you learned that approval was conditional. Maybe you experienced moments where unpredictability felt dangerous. So your brain adapted. It became vigilant. It became detailed. It became strategic. You don't just react. You simulate. You run scenarios. You calculate consequences. From the outside, this can look like anxiety. From the inside, it feels like preparation. Preparation for what? For uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable for you, not because you're weak, but because you care about stability. You care about impact. You care about meaning. Your mind doesn't like randomness. It prefers coherence. It wants to understand how things connect. That's not dysfunction. That's depth. The issue begins when your thinking disconnects from your body. When your mind keeps running but your nervous system stays tense. You can analyze something logically and still feel unsafe emotionally. That's when overthinking turns from insight into rumination. Insight feels curious. Rumination feels trapped. Insight expands possibilities. Rumination circles the same fear. The difference isn't intelligence, it's regulation. When your body feels grounded, your thoughts become tools. When your body feels threatened, your thoughts become alarms. You've probably experienced both. There are moments when your analysis helps you. You notice patterns others miss. You see red flags early. You make thoughtful decisions. That's overthinking in its functional form. But there are other moments when your mind won't stop, when the same scenario replays, when your thoughts feel sticky, when logic doesn't soothe you. That's not because you think too much. It's because something inside you feels unresolved. Unprocessed emotion often disguises itself as thinking. Instead of feeling disappointment, you analyze the situation. Instead of feeling fear, you strategize endlessly. Instead of admitting vulnerability, you dissect the details. Thinking becomes a shield, a way to avoid sitting with the raw sensation underneath. You tell yourself you're solving the problem, but sometimes you're avoiding the feeling. Feelings are messy. They're not logical. They don't follow neat sequences. So your brain tries to tidy them up through analysis. It searches for explanations, for causes, for control. Control feels safer than uncertainty, but control has limits. You can't think your way out of every emotional discomfort. And when you try, you create a loop. You think more because you don't feel settled. You don't feel settled because you're not allowing yourself to feel. That loop is exhausting. But notice something. The exhaustion isn't coming from depth. It's coming from resistance. Resistance to uncertainty. Resistance to vulnerability. Resistance to emotional exposure. Your mind keeps spinning because it's trying to protect you. But protection without release becomes pressure. Pressure builds. And when it builds long enough, you start labeling yourself. I'm too much. I'm too intense. I'm broken. But you're not broken. You're sensitive to complexity. You notice nuance. You sense undercurrents. You pick up on tone shifts, micro-expressions, subtle changes in energy. That awareness is powerful. It allows you to navigate the world thoughtfully. It allows you to empathize deeply. It allows you to anticipate consequences others overlook. But when you don't trust that awareness, it turns inward. It questions itself. It doubts its own conclusions. It second-guesses every instinct. That's when overthinking feels heavy. Not because you think, but because you don't trust what you think. Trust is the missing element. When you trust your perception, analysis becomes clarity. When you distrust yourself, analysis becomes paralysis. You replay conversations because you're unsure if your initial reaction was valid. You revisit decisions because you don't fully believe your judgment. You seek certainty in endless thinking because you're afraid to act without guarantees. But guarantees rarely exist. And depth without action creates stagnation. Action doesn't require perfect clarity. It requires enough trust to move forward with incomplete information. That's uncomfortable for someone who values precision, but growth lives there. You don't need to eliminate overthinking. You need to anchor it. Anchor it in your body, in your breath, in your felt sense of safety. When your nervous system settles, your mind softens. The thoughts don't disappear. They organize. They become tools instead of threats. Overthinking isn't the villain. It's unregulated depth. And depth, when grounded, becomes wisdom. Your mind isn't attacking you. It's attempting to protect you in the only way it knows how. The shift begins when you stop fighting your mind and start understanding it. Because the problem was never that you think too much. It's that no one taught you how to feel safely while thinking deeply. So if overthinking isn't the core problem, what is? The real issue begins when thinking replaces feeling. Not when thinking exists, but when it becomes the only language you trust. You learn to process life intellectually. You break things down. You analyze patterns. You simulate outcomes. But when emotion rises, you immediately convert it into logic. If you feel hurt, you explain why it shouldn't matter. If you feel anxious, you strategize how to eliminate the risk. If you feel uncertain, you research until you're mentally exhausted. You rarely sit with the raw sensation itself, because raw sensation feels unstable. And instability triggers your need for control. Control feels safe. Control feels intelligent. Control feels responsible. But control can quietly disconnect you from your own emotional processing. Overthinking becomes a substitute for experiencing. Instead of feeling rejection, you analyze what went wrong. Instead of feeling disappointment, you calculate better future strategies. Instead of feeling fear, you construct backup plans. Planning is useful, but when planning replaces processing, you never actually metabolize the emotion. Unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It lingers in the nervous system. And when it lingers, your mind tries harder. It spins faster. It looks for answers more urgently. It becomes louder. You interpret that loudness as dysfunction, but it's often a sign that something underneath hasn't been felt. There's a subtle distinction here. Thinking to understand is different from thinking to escape. When you think to understand, you feel curious. When you think to escape, you feel pressured. Curiosity expands. Pressure tightens. Overthinking that feels suffocating usually comes from pressure. Pressure to avoid mistakes. Pressure to avoid vulnerability. Pressure to avoid discomfort. pressure to avoid being wrong. But discomfort isn't dangerous. It's just unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity triggers vigilance in a mind that values certainty. The mind says, if I analyze enough, I'll eliminate risk. But life doesn't operate without risk. No amount of thinking can remove unpredictability entirely. When you attempt to do so, you exhaust yourself. The problem isn't that you think too much. It's that you think without grounding. Grounding is what transforms depth into clarity. Without grounding, your mind becomes a spinning engine. With grounding, it becomes a compass. Grounding isn't complicated. It's simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. It means slowing down. It means noticing your breath. It means feeling the tension in your body instead of immediately solving it. It means allowing emotion to exist for a moment without converting it into a problem. That's uncomfortable at first, because you're used to managing everything cognitively. Sitting with emotion feels unproductive. It feels inefficient. But efficiency isn't the goal of healing. Integration is. When you allow emotion to surface without judgment, something interesting happens. It peaks, then it settles. Your nervous system recalibrates. Your thoughts slow down naturally, not because you forced them to, but because the underlying signal has been acknowledged. Overthinking often spikes when emotion is denied. When you suppress frustration, your mind looks for flaws. When you suppress sadness, your mind searches for causes. When you suppress fear, your mind constructs endless scenarios. It's not malfunctioning. It's compensating. Compensating for the fact that feeling was never fully allowed. You may have learned early on that strong emotion wasn't welcome. Maybe you were told to be strong. Maybe vulnerability was dismissed. Maybe uncertainty was criticized. So you adapted. You leaned into intellect. Intellect is praised. Intellect is rewarded. Intellect feels safe. But intellect without emotional literacy creates imbalance. It sharpens your perception while neglecting your regulation. You become hyper-aware without feeling stable. And hyper-awareness without stability feels like anxiety. That's why overthinking can feel like an enemy, because it's loud. But underneath the noise is often something quieter, a feeling that needs space. Space without immediate analysis. Space without correction. Space without judgment. This is where most advice goes wrong. People say stop overthinking, as if it's a switch, as if depth can simply be turned off. But turning it off isn't the solution. Learning to sit inside it without spiraling is. When you ground yourself, your thinking becomes clearer. You can ask, what am I actually feeling right now? And instead of answering intellectually, you pause. You sense. You notice the tightness in your chest, the restlessness in your stomach, the subtle fatigue behind your eyes. That awareness brings you back into your body. And once you're in your body, your thoughts lose their frantic edge. They become quieter, more organized, more precise. You begin to see the difference between a useful thought and a looping one. Useful thoughts move forward. Looping thoughts circle the same fear. When you're grounded, you can gently redirect, not with force, with clarity. You don't silence your mind. You guide it. That's the shift. Overthinking doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs direction. Direction that comes from self-trust. Self-trust that comes from emotional regulation. Emotional regulation that comes from presence. Presence that comes from slowing down long enough to feel without solving. That's uncomfortable at first. But discomfort is not danger. It's growth. Your mind isn't your enemy. It's an intelligent system that was trained to protect you. Now you're simply retraining it to protect you differently. Not through endless analysis, but through grounded awareness. When depth meets grounding, overthinking transforms. It stops being a prison and starts becoming insight. There's a moment when you begin to see it clearly. You don't overthink because you're flawed. You overthink because you care. You care about doing things right. You care about not hurting people. You care about making decisions that align with who you are. That level of care isn't weakness. It's depth. But depth without self-trust turns against you. When you don't trust your first instinct, you replay it. When you don't trust your judgment, you reanalyze it. When you don't trust your worth, you question every interaction. The exhaustion doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doubting. Doubt stretches a simple thought into 10 scenarios. Doubt turns reflection into rumination. Doubt makes every decision feel heavier than it needs to be. And doubt grows louder when you disconnect from your body. Because your body often knows before your mind does. It signals discomfort. It signals alignment. It signals tension. But when you ignore those signals and try to outthink them, your mind works overtime. You might notice this in small ways. You make a choice. Your body feels neutral, but your mind starts scanning for flaws. Was that the right move? What if I missed something? What if they think differently? You weren't anxious at first. You became anxious after the analysis. That's the turning point. When you realize the anxiety isn't coming from the event, it's coming from the mistrust. Mistrust in yourself. And mistrust can't be solved with more thought. It's rebuilt through experience. Small actions taken without perfect certainty. Small risks accepted without complete control. You decide. You act. You allow the outcome to unfold. And when the world doesn't collapse, your nervous system learns something new. It learns that uncertainty is survivable. It learns that imperfect action is safe. It learns that you don't need endless analysis to remain intact. Overthinking loses its urgency when trust begins to grow. Trust that you can handle discomfort. Trust that mistakes won't define you. Trust that your depth is not a liability. You don't have to silence your mind. You just have to stop treating it like a threat, because your mind was never the enemy. It was just trying to keep you safe in the only way it knew how. Now the real shift begins, not when you silence your thoughts, but when you relate to them differently. Instead of asking, how do I stop overthinking? You begin asking, what is my mind trying to protect right now? That question changes everything, because it turns your mind from enemy into messenger. When a thought loops, pause, not to fight it, not to judge it, just to notice it. What is it circling? Failure, rejection, embarrassment, loss of control. Overthinking almost always circles fear. Not abstract fear, personal fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of making the wrong move and regretting it. Once you name the fear, the thought softens slightly. It loses some of its mystery. Your brain was trying to solve for safety, but safety isn't found through certainty. It's found through resilience. Resilience grows when you experience uncertainty and remain intact. So instead of solving every possible outcome, you experiment with tolerating the unknown. That's uncomfortable. Your mind will resist. It will offer more scenarios, more analysis, more hypotheticals. And this time, you don't chase them. You let them pass, not suppressing, not indulging, just observing. This is where overthinking begins to transform. You realize something subtle. Thoughts are not commands. They are suggestions. Some are useful, some are protective, some are outdated. You don't need to obey all of them. You can evaluate them gently, calmly, without panic. For example, you send a message. Hours pass without a reply. Your mind starts generating interpretations. They're annoyed. I said something wrong. I shouldn't have sent that. Instead of diving in, you pause. You feel the tension in your chest. You acknowledge it. This is uncertainty, not rejection, not failure, just uncertainty. And uncertainty is survivable. Your nervous system settles slightly. The thoughts slow down. You haven't solved anything, but you've regulated something. That regulation is power. Overthinking loses its intensity when your body feels safe, which means the real work isn't cognitive first. It's physiological. Slow breathing, grounded posture, movement, eye contact with the present moment. These small actions signal safety to your brain. When the brain senses safety, it doesn't need to overanalyze. It can relax. Your depth remains, but the urgency fades. This is what integration looks like. You don't reject your mind. You anchor it. You don't try to become someone less thoughtful. You become someone more embodied. Embodiment changes the quality of thought. Thought becomes reflective instead of reactive, intentional instead of impulsive, measured instead of frantic. You start noticing when a thought is looping. It feels repetitive, predictable. It circles the same fear. Instead of feeding it, you shift attention to sensation. Feet on the floor, air moving in your lungs, muscles relaxing slightly. That shift interrupts the spiral, not by force, by redirection. Over time, your mind learns something new. It learns that it doesn't have to work so hard, that you can handle discomfort without overcompensating, that you can make decisions without perfect certainty, that you can survive imperfection. That's the real growth, not becoming someone who thinks less, but becoming someone who trusts more. Trust doesn't eliminate doubt. It reduces its authority. Doubt can exist without dominating you. You can say, I might be wrong, and still act. You can say, I feel uncertain, and still move forward. That flexibility is strength. Rigid certainty is fragile. Flexible confidence is resilient. Overthinking often tries to create rigid certainty, but life rewards flexible confidence. You don't need every outcome mapped. You need the capacity to respond. and you already have that capacity. You've survived discomfort before. You've handled mistakes before. You've recovered from uncertainty before. Your mind just hasn't updated its data. It still believes that over-preparing is necessary. Now you're teaching it something different. That presence is enough. That awareness is enough. That grounded depth is more powerful than frantic analysis. This doesn't happen overnight. There will still be nights when your mind races. There will still be moments when doubt gets loud. But instead of spiraling, you recognize the pattern. You breathe. You feel. You anchor. And the spiral shortens. Gradually, your relationship with your mind shifts. You stop fighting it. You start guiding it. You stop labeling yourself as too much. You start seeing yourself as perceptive. You stop trying to shrink your depth. You start stabilizing it. Overthinking isn't the problem. Unanchored depth is. And once depth is anchored, it becomes clarity. It becomes foresight. It becomes emotional intelligence. Your mind isn't something to silence. It's something to integrate. And integration happens when thinking and feeling work together, instead of against each other. So maybe the goal was never to become someone who thinks less. Maybe the goal was to become someone who thinks without fear. There's a quiet difference. Fear-driven thinking tightens. Grounded thinking clarifies. For a long time, you believed your mind was the obstacle. If only you could quiet it, simplify it, be more spontaneous, then you'd finally feel free. But freedom doesn't come from shrinking your depth. It comes from trusting it. You don't think too much. You think deeply. And deep minds need grounding, not silencing. You were told that confidence means certainty. That decisive people don't hesitate. That strong people don't doubt. But that's incomplete. Real confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's the willingness to move with doubt present. It's the ability to say, I don't have all the answers, but I trust myself enough to act. That trust quiets the panic. Not because the unknown disappears, but because you no longer treat uncertainty as danger. Your overthinking was never random chaos. It was intelligence without regulation, sensitivity without grounding, awareness without self-trust. Now you're integrating those pieces. You're allowing yourself to feel before solving. You're allowing uncertainty without overcorrecting. You're allowing depth without labeling it as defect. And something softens. The mental noise doesn't vanish, but it loses its sharpness. It becomes background awareness instead of frontline threat. You begin to see your mind differently, not as something to battle, but as something to collaborate with. When a thought spirals, you don't panic. You pause. What is this trying to protect? You listen. You regulate. You respond. That's maturity, not suppressing your depth, but stewarding it. You start noticing that your ability to analyze, reflect, and anticipate isn't a curse. It's discernment. It's emotional intelligence. It's pattern recognition. In the right state, your mind becomes strategic, empathetic, insightful. You don't need to trade that away to feel calm. You just need to root it in your body. Root it in breath. Root it in presence. Because thinking without grounding feels like spiraling. Thinking with grounding feels like wisdom. The shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You stop asking, how do I fix my mind? And start asking, how do I support it? Support looks like sleep. Support looks like slowing down. Support looks like feeling before solving. Support looks like accepting that perfection isn't required for movement. Your mind was never broken. It was trying to protect you with the tools it had. Now you're upgrading those tools. You're teaching yourself that safety doesn't require total control. That growth doesn't require certainty. That depth doesn't require apology. And maybe the thing you called overthinking was never the enemy. Maybe it was just your intelligence waiting to be grounded, waiting to be trusted, waiting to be used as clarity instead of fear.